the financial life has become more complicated, and the advisor has to expand and evolve to meet them at this new level of need.
What if the biggest barrier to working with ultra high net worth clients isn't your network, but your mindset? Welcome to Visionary Advisor. I'm your host, Alex Kirby, founder of Total Family. Today, we're tackling one of the questions we hear most often. How do I find and connect with more ultra high net worth clients? To help us answer that, I'm joined by Ken Haman, Managing Director of the Advisor Institute at AllianceBernstein. Ken is a true leader in the space, someone who has helped Total Family shape some of our own approaches. This episode is all about understanding the emotional journey of the ultra high net worth client. If you want to build a practice that resonates at the high end of the market, you'll need a growth mindset, and you'll want to lean into the insights Ken shares in this conversation. It's time to hear from Ken Haman. Ken, welcome to the Visionary Advisor podcast.
Alex, it's great to be with you today. I'm looking forward to our conversation very much.
You are the Managing Director of the Advisor Institute at AllianceBernstein, and you wrote a white paper called The Emotional Journey of the Ultra High Net Worth Client. Is that right?
That is correct. Our most recent publication from the Advisor Institute.
What made you want to write this paper? And it's pretty long, right? Like it's dense. There's a lot of information and ideas for advisors to explore in here. Why did you do this?
Well, it was by design to be as long as it is and to be as dense as it is. The design was to ensure that the advisors approaching the topic or the skill set of working with these human beings who are in this incredibly unique circumstance of having almost immeasurable levels of wealth, certainly unprecedented levels of wealth, and the complexity of their lives, that the advisor would be taking that task seriously and understanding the magnitude of it. Now, what caused me to pursue the research was what's been driving most of what we do at the Advisor Institute over the last 20 years, and that was there's just not much information about the emotional experience that these human beings we call the uniquely successful human beings have. And so our mission is to fill in some of the glaring empty holes in the knowledge base of financial advisors by lending them insights from the behavioral sciences so they can work more effectively with these kinds of human beings in this kind of situation.
It's interesting because obviously there's a lens here for ultra high net worth through selling a business. And it's pretty hard to get there without selling a business, right? Unless you inherit the wealth. Is that fair?
That is fair. If you look worldwide, in other countries, this significant level of wealth is a little more often the result of multi-generational transmission. In the United States, with our entrepreneurial kind of focus, the most common way people achieve this unique level of wealth, what we call the ultra high net worth state, is through their own efforts and through the sale of a business. You see it occasionally with professionals, sports professionals or entertainment professionals. It's not common, but their experience is very similar to the business owner. So there's a lot of similarity from experience to experience in that regard.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into it because I think any advisor, certainly AB has expertise and credibility at the ultra high net worth level, right? And I think lots of advisors want to get there, but I think there's a bit of a learning curve to move from mass affluent to high net worth to ultra high net worth. But you start with this really interesting question that comes from Clayton Christensen, where you talk about the job to be done. And you say that the job to be done by the advisors might not be what they think it is.
Almost always when I look at the financial advisor's role with the human beings they're working with, I see a gap between what the client actually needs from a financial advisor and what the professional is offering. If you look, for example, at the simplest level, if you look at the mass affluent individual who has achieved enough wealth that they have the beginnings of a complex financial life. They're at the beginning stage of being able to invest and to do so at a level that's going to be productive over time. The job to be done by the advisor is to grow the money, but part of the job to be done is also to educate the client about the enterprise of growing money, the risk-adjusted, diversified, long-term perspective on the growth of that wealth, because human beings don't come pre-skilled in the understanding of how the financial process of growing wealth works. And so the advisor certainly has the job to be done is to grow the money and to build a portfolio, et cetera. The traditional role as people in financial services think of it. But there's also an advice component and an engagement component and an educational component that's part of the job to be done. Or the human being who is the client is left bumbling about inside their head, which in no way is kind of automatically conditioned to do well when it comes to financial decision making.
The job to be done seems to be changing. I feel like, and you point out in the paper, some of this like portfolio optimization and focusing on the financial aspects of being an advisor. Is it safe to say, like, if we go back 20 years, it was a little bit closer to that, but as we sit here today, it's shifting rapidly due to, technology, people's access to information, new tools entering the market, all that type of stuff?
Absolutely. I started working with my first retail financial advisor as a consultant coach over 30 years ago. And at that time, when I started consulting in the offices, the name of this role was stockbroker. Right. And they are, for the most part at that time, this is before the kind of widespread adoption of modern portfolio theory, the job of the stockbroker was to find equity or bond investments to represent the client in the capital markets because the client didn't have direct access to the capital markets, and to acquire these investments that would grow. And that was the job. It was pretty simple and straightforward. There wasn't even risk-adjusted investing at that point in time. At least that was still nascent in the adoption across the industry. So over 30 years, what's happened? Well, we have the advent of modern portfolio theory and this idea of investing for the long term, really understanding the enterprise of what financial services is providing, the shift from commission to fee-based, the widespread adoption of financial planning, and now we have advisors who are engaging human beings more holistically and using tools that are relatively recent. The Monte Carlo.
You can say total family. It's all right.
Well, you would be the latest iteration of a tool set that's entering the marketplace and equipping advisors to work with clients at their point of need, which is a term we use a lot at the Advisor Institute, delivering to people at their point of need. The point of need of an investor today is not a portfolio structure. Right. In the very near future, you and I are recording this in the aftermath of the rise of artificial intelligence, the arrival of these generative AI. In the very near future, portfolios are going to be built by machines that can look at the entire marketplace and make statistically based conclusions far better than human beings can. Yeah. So what's emerging then is the job to be done, which is what you brought up, Clayton Christensen's great terminology. The job to be done of the advisor is changing. And what I observe and what I try to communicate in my writings, as the wealth level of the client evolves and changes, the job to be done of the advisor evolves and changes. And it's directly connected to the level of complexity associated with the wealth they've accumulated.
Yeah, most of the advisors listening to this podcast are growth oriented. They understand a lot of things that you just said. And you have in your paper, clients with growing wealth and complexity will recognize when their advisor can't meet their needs, opening the door for more sophisticated competition. And I found this quote from Rockefeller's in his book, The 38 Letters to His Son. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's fantastic. The greatest reward for our hard work is not what we get, but what we will become. And to me, this idea that you want to work with the ultra high net worth clients is great if you're an advisor, but you're going to have to work to get there, right? Someone with $30 million or $40 million or $50 million isn't just asking a random person for advice. The people that they confide in and the people that they bring into their circle to help them make decisions, these people have elevated their skill set, raised the bar. If you think about it like professional sports, maybe mass affluent is whatever, AA baseball, and high net worth is AAA baseball, and ultra high net worth is the big leagues. And so you have to elevate your skill set through your education, your growth, what you're bringing to the table, how you're kind of integrating all of these ideas. I think that's a way to think about it. And if you're an advisor who wants to work at the ultra high net worth level, it isn't just going to happen. You're going to have to build your skill set to be able to keep up with the pitches that are coming at you at, that are 100 miles an hour or whatever. Would you agree with that it's the advisors that want to work at this level are going to have to elevate?
Absolutely. They're going to have to elevate, and they're going to have to overcome their own limitations. Most people who get into the job of the retail financial advisor, it wasn't like they went off to college and took a degree in it, though there are degrees now in financial planning. They're often accidental arrivals, or they conclude in their early part of their early midlife that they want to give this a try. And as a result of that, they approach it from a fairly narrow frame of reference. They're fascinated with the capital markets and with investing and the experience of growing money. And so they come into the business and they are eager to work with people who want to grow their money. And it's amazing how often the financial advisor who's pushing themselves up market continues to think that the need of the client as they get into the higher net worth and then the ultra high net worth continues to be growing the money, as if the growth of the money is the issue for that person. And what we see, and there's some classic examples of this, and I've seen this over and over again, there's the advisor who picks up a client who's an entrepreneur, who's running a business. The business hasn't taken off yet. They have a good, solid relationship. The entrepreneurs, puts a little bit of money away, invests a little bit of money, but the big risk they're taking and the big growth potentials in their business. So they grow the business, it takes off, then they sell the business. And of course, the advisor who's worked with them over the, let's say, 10 or 15 years is like, oh, hot diggity dog. Now I get to work with big money with this person that I've built trust with. And it is not always the case, but more often than not, after a short period of time with this infusion of wealth, the entrepreneur who's now a uniquely successful individual, no longer a business owner, now a wealthy investor, changes advisors because they've outgrown the limitation of the previous. So that's simply saying the same thing you're saying, that if you want to work in this space, you have to fit the space. You have to understand the needs. And your business model has to reflect that you're going to deliver to this type of person's point of need, as opposed to the point of need of somebody you're used to working with, whose primary concern is not having enough. Right. That mindset isn't present in the uniquely successful individual with $100 million. Their driver is not, oh, I hope I'm going to be okay. It's a completely different internal motivational structure and a completely different set of needs.
Okay, so we're going to jump into that. I don't want to skip over some of the mass affluent and high net worth. So I want to read you a couple of quotes that you should be familiar with because they're yours. The mass affluent client's emotional journey is defined by his desire to fund a comfortable retirement as early as possible. The process of investing is driven by the anxiety of retirement. Is that how we classify kind of the emotional journey of the mass affluent? It's largely about retirement.
Right.
And like Social Security and that kind of elements.
Exactly. This is an individual, and it's the vast majority of people who are investing. And remember, only the top 40% of the culture in the United States even has enough money to think about investing. So you're talking about, people that relative to the larger culture are very successful, but their concern is, will I be okay? It's a fundamental question. It's a question about anxiety, existential well-being, and accumulating enough that I have some reason to believe that in the future I will be financially secure.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, the reality is that even the majority of people who are mass affluent in this culture are not accumulating the wealth they need to be secure. I think the statistic is like less than 0.5% of all 401k plans have more than $1 million in them. So, we're talking about individuals who are investing and working with advisors, and their fundamental concern is, will they be okay? Now, there is a small number, percentage-wise, a large number in actual numbers of people who accomplish that. So they solve the problem, am I going to be okay? They, at some point in their life, some early, some later, have enough that they know they're going to be okay. And what's interesting, and going back to your statement, the job to be done, for these human beings, the driver now becomes very different. It's no longer, what do I need to do to be okay? Now it's, what do I need to do to make sure I don't make a mistake, that nothing's missing? And in that context, the work of the advisor has to expand. They need to continue managing the assets correctly, safely, properly, grow at an appropriate rate for this human's ultimate goals. But they also have to be addressing a larger scope of issues associated with the well-being of this family. No longer will I be okay. Now, what am I missing that could hurt me? What am I missing I should be taking advantage of? The financial life has become more complicated, and the advisor has to expand and evolve to meet them at this new level of need.
Yeah, we definitely believe family dynamics are applicable at all of the levels that we're talking about here. Mass affluent, high net worth, and ultra high net worth. Because you can say, this is my number, I need to get to retirement. And you can be looking at that number for 30 years. But to us, there's other conversations that you can be having that are going to be helpful to your clients. You talked about sort of the loss of purpose in this journey, and we'll get to that. But that's going to happen when people retire. Thinking about their legacy, thinking about how they communicate some of these changes with their families. These things are not specific just to ultra high net worth. Just because we're going to focus on ultra high net worth doesn't mean that there isn't ways, as you're saying, for the advisors to expand their scope. Now, on the high net worth level, I loved what you just said, can be summed up with the question, what am I missing? To get to the ultra high net worth level, you have to get usually through the high net worth level. You have to get comfortable with those folks. And that question of what am I missing is one that I think a lot of advisors need to be comfortable answering. There isn't just one answer to that question, but they always want to know, what are other people with $10 million doing? What are they thinking about? Not just, am I keeping score, but what are the other structures and ideas and things that are helpful for those groups? The what am I missing question, to me, is like one of my favorite Ken tidbits out of this whole paper.
Well, the high net worth individual or the high net worth family typically again, unless it's someone who's on the way to being the ultra high net worth individual, typically they evolve into that high net worth status. They have a higher degree of income. Perhaps there's some family resources that come in there, and over the course of their middle life, they expand in terms of their wealth. They don't achieve necessarily this kind of ultra liberation and uber resource pool that the ultra high net worth client has, but they're not just comfortable, they have plenty of assets. And that evolution means that gradually they sneak up on the fact that they're now dealing with complexity that nothing in their earlier part of their life prepared them for. But at least for them, there's time to kind of get their head around it, get their arms around it. What's tragic to me is that as these folks evolve, they're not bringing with them an understanding of what you need when you have 5, 7, 10, 15 millions of dollars. And so our belief at the Advisor Institute is that the advisor who wants to work effectively in that space needs to meet them at their point of need, which is to help them understand what's missing, to know more than they know about the situation, to be able to borrow on the experience of others that the advisors worked with. And we call that, kind of their business model then is a standard of care that expands to the level of complexity of the wealth that the individual has created. The reason I say there's a tragedy here is that for many advisors, there's no change in what they think they should be doing or what they think the job to be done for the client is, even when the client now has substantial complexity and the need to make decisions in a variety of places in their life with which they are not prepared to make, that they don't have the knowledge to make them. They have the resources to make decisions. Simple example would be the ability to fund long-term care insurance. And that's probably as simplistic a financial strategy as you could imagine at that level. Perhaps the mass affluent don't want to afford it. Certainly the higher net worth can. Well, how in the world is an individual going to sort out all the different options available in that category of solution? And by the way, that's just one of maybe 50 solutions. The advisor who's working in that space needs to expand their thinking to understand that this person needs a lot of advice in a lot of areas. And by the way, one of the things that Total Family is going to remind that advisor is that this family is now in a place where from time to time they may start to consciously say, well, how's this lifestyle affecting the kids? Where are we headed? What's our legacy? The high net worth client often has the resources to have a legacy. It may not be enough to fund kids' lifestyles for the next 5 generations, but there is a legacy. Well, who's going to help them uncover that process and really grapple with it thoughtfully? Nothing in their life has prepared them. They've never been 60 and rich before. And they've never raised kids in that context. Their parents certainly didn't in most cases. So the advisor is going to need a wider range of skills, not just financially, but in terms of a lot of the other navigational decisions that these families need to make. It's critically important that the advisor understands that journey so they can meet that person where they need to be met along the way.
And they're not going to understand the journey unless they study it, right? You can say, I've worked with clients with $30 million or $40 million and do exit planning training, and all that stuff is good, but you have to study it. You have to really understand what is happening here. I feel like there's a huge opportunity at the high net worth level for tons of advisors. They get lost in a lot of ways. The mass affluent, they sort of, everyone's pushing them towards technology. Everyone's trying to target these huge ultra high net worth wealthy clients. And if you have $15 or $20 million, sometimes I feel like you get lost in this whole process. And those are wonderful wealth management clients that are going to be receptive to your ideas if you bring them good ideas.
Well, absolutely. And by the way, not just receptive, eager, right? Eager to embrace these ideas because they know that they don't know. And they're anxious about what they don't know. What could I be missing that could hurt me? What could I be missing I should be taking advantage of? What am I missing that might hurt my kids? Mm-hmm. What am I missing in terms of the quality of my relationship, and how does that put our well-being as a family at risk? There's a host of issues that become top of mind or begin to emerge as questions. And if the advisor's not familiar with that space, and by the way, the advisor has never been there. Very few advisors grew up in high net worth families that were grappling with these issues consciously and thoughtfully. These are relatively new issues emerging in our culture. And so to your point, it requires a professional discipline of learning and some thoughtfulness about business model design. And that's just, and by the way, that's just at the high net worth level that we don't see this evolving at all at the level that it probably needs to. In terms of the business opportunity is huge, but we're not even talking about what happens then at the ultra high net worth level.
Yeah. The Ultra High Net Worth Institute uses that term integrated advisor. And I really like that because your client isn't expecting you to be an expert at every single facet of every single area, but you do have to have an understanding enough to tie it all in and have an understanding mostly of your client. You say, I get you and I know how to help. I love that as just a very simple advisor messaging. And, to me, the integrated piece of this, like if you're an advisor, you need to tie everything in for the client. That's really what integration means. It's not little, if you want it to be siloed, the client can do that themselves. They can go grab random silos of information and not have everything tied back together. But the advisors that are integrating this and saying, here's all the information, let's tie it together and let's use this to make a decision based on all the things that I know about you. Jay Hughes says families are social systems, not economic systems. So this isn't just a money conversation related to everything. And the other thing that you said, Ken, that I love is like, these are new problems. 100 years ago, everyone lived to be 40. So we have more generations at play than we ever have. People are living longer. There's just more complications to all of this stuff. There's more, the world is more complex and it's moving faster. So these are opportunities for advisors to help simplify and make decisions for people. Now, I want to go to the ultra high net worth piece because I think that's probably why folks are here. You have the 5 stages of the business owner's emotional journey. And in case you forgot them, founding the business, preparing to sell, experiencing the liquidity event, adapting to the ultra high net worth life, and then mastering a new life. Should we go through all of them, or do you think there's one particular area that, because I know everyone's going to read your paper after this. So is there one particular area? Should we go through them all?
Well, I think we should at least touch on the process. And in the paper, you'll recall, I borrow from the work of Joseph Campbell, who wrote this famous book, Hero with a Thousand Faces. Mm-hmm. And you have to remember, as a psychologist, we look at the journey of the human being and the various kinds of experiences of change in terms of a process. And Campbell describes this kind of universal human experience of going along in life. Things are pretty much as you've understood them to be. Something interrupts that. There's this descent into uncertainty and grappling and discovering new stuff. It's very anxious making, very painful in times, even wounding. But then emerging on the other side as a different person. And what he says is in this wonderful book, and then emerging with something to offer back to the world. So there's this kind of descent into being forged into something new and different, and perhaps somewhat wounded, perhaps evolved in a more powerful way. And this very much informed my look at the emotional journey of the ultra high net worth client. And the reason I think we should touch on these things is because of the following observation. The point in time where the client that the advisor wants to work with, who is not yet but will at one point be the ultra high net worth client, who has experienced a liquidity event that has fundamentally catapulted them from a high net worth into an unprecedented level of wealth, a truly uniquely successful human as measured by wealth. That process starts when they decide to sell the business. And what's important but mostly missed by the folks who work with these clients is that moment of deciding to sell is the last moment that this human being has a sense of knowing themselves, having a firm sense of identity, having a confidence in what they're doing on a daily basis. They've built this business, they're running this business, they've been confirmed in this business. Their cognitive bandwidth is as expansive as it can be, bearing in mind that all human beings are constantly struggling with too much information and having a narrow frame, which is critically important. But this individual is at the height of that sense of confidence, positive power, hopefulness, optimism, confirmed in all they've done. They decide to sell, and that begins a descent. And this is missed in the industry. What causes the descent is then the process of preparing the business to sale because they've never done it before. They now have to hire a whole bunch of folks to help them. That whole valuation process and looking at the enterprise value rather than the lifestyle contribution, restaffing, redesigning business model, improving processes, adopting new protocols, firing some people, hiring some people, changing the team. Very disruptive. And that starts this descent where the business owner is no longer in charge of their own process. The process is now in charge of them. And what we observe, and this is right from the work of Kahneman and the others who were the luminaries of behavioral economics, cognitive bandwidth shrinks. And they become anxious and they become less able to grapple with the big picture of things because they're so assaulted by all the changes and issues that have to be dealt with on the way to the sale. And obviously the sale represents this enormous windfall and boon. But the people who work in this space are constantly baffled by the fact that this individual seems to have no time or attention for anything else other than what's right in front of them. This collapse of cognitive bandwidth means they collapse both in terms of the scope of what they're willing to pay attention to and the time frame that they will consider as important. Virtually everything the world ends at the liquidity event. I'll get to everything else after that. And what happens is they make significant errors. If you talk to anyone who works in the pre-transaction planning world, getting folks pinned down is really challenging. Now, but where I'm going here is, I think, of critical importance because eventually there's a liquidity event. All this wealth comes in. Almost always they've done something to catch it. They've done some financial planning. Not always. I've worked with a couple of situations where there was a whole bunch of cash in banks, looking for a place to go. That's not common, but it does happen. And then there is this experience post-wealth that virtually no one understands. There's a couple of theoreticians who talk about it, a couple of consultants. One describes it as like being an immigrant into a new country where you don't know the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know the culture, and you don't have the same identity.
Is that James Grubman?
Grubman, yes. So what happens is their sense of identity is stripped from them. They're no longer the business owner. They're no longer, if they're still involved, they're in a subordinate role in some way.
Right.
The people that they've journeyed with are no longer around or are in some different relationship. Their family is no longer connected to them. Often there's toxic envy that occurs.
Before we get to that part, the founding of the business, when you get to prepare to sell, you say it ends once the owner seriously considers selling. Now, they could have been running this business for 20 years or 30 years, right? So to me, the lesson here for advisors is, we start with vision, values, purpose, roles, right? Getting to know people, getting to know their spouse, their kids, their legacy, their culture, all this kind of stuff. If you don't do this before the person decides to sell, they're not doing it until this whole thing is done, right? I think that's really important for advisors to hear. It seems like there's lots of time, but as soon as they mentally hit that switch, it's total focus, right? And you use some great examples in there. And so to me, those preparing to sell and experiencing the liquidity event, there's a role for the advisor in there in terms of structures and how things are getting paid out and taxed and da-da-da-da. But these people are hyper-focused, right? They're now trying to monetize this asset they've worked on for their entire life. And as you're saying, like, man, I feel really good knowing how to run my business. Now, I don't know how any of this works. I've never sold an operating company before. I don't know who to trust. I don't know what promises are real and what promises are fake. I'm worried that the transaction might not close. I am still running my business on top of all this kind of stuff. So the thought of like, hey, we should catch up for coffee, it's not happening, right?
It is. It's very challenging for the advisor. And so my advice to the advisor is, if you know this is going to happen, it's virtually predictable. If you know where they are on their financial journey, you can predict with a high degree of accuracy what's going to happen to them when they start down this path into this descent. The time to connect with them and to advise them is before that descent occurs, right before they decide to sell, when they're starting to contemplate it. And for the advisor who's equipped to say, okay,
yes,
let's take a moment here, and we're going to explore two things. We're going to explore thing one, what I know about what you're going to go through, and we're going to set up some triggers and some anchors so that when you're in the weeds and unable to come up for a breath of air, I can remind you that there are going to be some things we need to do. And I want to call you back to this kind of clarity of thought and set this up. But to your point, the other thing to start thinking about before the sale is, okay, if we sell for $120 million, what does that money mean?
Yeah.
Where are we headed with that? What's the vision of this? How is this going to affect the family? How do we want this to affect the family?
Yeah.
To start those conversations before they're distracted, that's going to require the advisor to say, hey, I've seen this journey before. I know what to expect, and I know some of the hard work that needs to be done. Let's make sure we get this done. The job to be done of the advisor in terms of advising this business owner is profoundly larger and far away from what's the deployment of this capital going to look like. I mean, that's the easy part. The hard part is, what's this money mean?
Yeah. You say, like, going back to what am I missing? A great way to answer that question is, hey, I want to get your words right here. You have how the point of highest confidence occurs immediately before selling, when identity is fully rooted in being a business owner. Hey, when you sell your business, you're going to experience a massive shift in your identity. That's something I might be missing. When you do vision, values, purpose, roles, prior to all this happening, that is a lens to help us make decisions about who our ultimate acquirer or buyer is going to be, how it's going to impact the people in our lives, what's important to us, the purpose of the money, all these things. If it's not figured out before they make the decision, it's kind of too late, because then they go into the abyss, as you say, the descent. The descent,
right. Their cognitive bandwidth shrinks. Their attention narrows in time and in scope, and they are unable to grapple with those kind of philosophical things. It's like they'll say, yeah, I know it's important. I just don't have time for it right now.
Yep.
And the point is, you've got to have that big, rich, fully formed identity, fully formed confidence, hope for the future, positive, ample energy to have those conversations. But even more importantly, the advisor has to be equipped either to facilitate the conversation themselves or to introduce to this client the resourcing they need to have those conversations. But the advisor's job is to be a skillful guide for what is going to be an arduous journey. I'm reminded of what's his name, Kit Carson, who was this very famous guide on the Oregon Trail.
I don't know who that is, but okay.
All
right.
A famous figure from the Wild West days.
Yep. I know the Oregon Trail.
He would lead the wagon trains across this incredibly harsh terrain with all the dangers that was surround them. But because he knew how to get there, he knew what trails to take at what time of year, and he knew what it was going to take for them all to get there. These wagon trainers could borrow on his knowledge, have confidence that someone was leading them, and get to the other end safely. Now imagine, again, thinking about talking to advisors here, imagine at the end of the trail what the group of wagon train folks felt toward their guide in terms of their safe arrival. Would there ever be someone more significant in their life than that person that facilitated that?
Right. And told them what was coming.
Exactly.
And helped them prepare for it. You talk about this person then emerging following the transaction as a different person. And again, I think about the question, what am I missing? Well, after you go through this transaction, you are going to emerge as a different person. So much of your identity is tied up into the business. You alluded to it earlier and I cut you off, but toxic envy, loss of community, all these people you work with on every day, depending on how your transaction plays out, those people could be gone. Different relationships with your family, different expectations for people. I mean, when I read these things as someone who is not ultra high net worth, I was like, this is really interesting stuff to me. This makes total sense to me. And if someone laid it out for me in a way, especially with the research and the references that you put in the paper, it's like, what else do you know? This is really helpful to me and probably really helpful for the people around me in my life, because you can create mock scenarios, right? You can talk about some of what happens if this, what would we do? How would this play out? And I think being that guide and telling people, hey, we're going to go through this really tough, I don't know what the terrain on the Oregon Trail was like, other than it was probably pretty tough. But hey, we're going to go around this bend, and there's this really tough part around the bend. But once we get through that part, you got to make sure you do this and this when we're there. Once you get through that, we're going to have time to rest and figure it out. It's like, to me, that is the advisor guide role in a way that I haven't seen every advisor think about it.
Well, and for many advisors, it's daunting. It's intimidating. It does require study, and it does require experiences. You can't just wake up one morning and say, oh, I think I want to go work with those clients because they have such large pools of money. It will be so much better for my business. Well, yeah, if you are able to construct a business model and so equip yourself that you can meet them at their point of need, then it is going to be a tremendous business. And with human beings who adore you and who look up to you and trust you and regard you. But there is this sense of the understanding the emotional journey. And that's why the paper was created. Mr. and Ms. Advisor, if you're going to work with this type of client, here's what their emotional journey looks like, which is going to define their point of need. And here's the rub that I think that emerges, and I have almost a frantic concern about this because I see it so often. If we remember that the point of highest confidence and positive emotional well-being was right before we sold the business. Mm-hmm. Imagine you go forward now through the liquidity event. You're on the other side of the liquidity event, maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year. You don't have that sense of identity anymore. You have all this money, and your relationship with your advisor is now different because in the past you ran the business that created the money. Now somebody else is managing the money that you're living on. That's a new weird thing.
Yep.
Mistakes could be made. And you hear a lot of advisors talk about people who've retired or people who've sold businesses the first year. It's like they call them every day. Are you paying attention to this? Are you aware of that? Or their anxiety because the wealth is over there being managed by somebody else. But here's the thing that I'm frantically concerned about. And here's the thing that Total Family represents as a solution of significance for this class of client. What happens in that first 6 or 9 months is the human beings are in pain. You've lost your identity, you've lost your affiliation, you've lost your community, you've lost your belonging, you've lost the place you go every day, you lost all the patterns of your life. Now, great news, you have utter freedom, and you've taken the best vacation you've ever taken, and you went off and had the greatest experiences you've ever had, but you still come back to yourself. And you still come back to getting up in the morning and, okay, what am I doing today? And what begins to happen is this sense of yearning for that feeling of confidence and that feeling of power and that feeling of capability and that feeling of connection. And almost inevitably, the individual on the other side of the wealth event says, I want to go start another business.
The loop. Exactly. They want to loop back. And what's tragic about that is that from time to time they are successful with it, but more often than not, the conditions that enabled them to create the first business do not exist for this next enterprise.
Right.
And that pursuit is actually avoiding a necessary piece of work. And that piece of work is, as my colleague C.J. McClanahan talks about, helping his clients discover the new game at which they're going to win, which is the game of what this wealth means and what the vision of this means and what the mission of this means and what we as a family are going to author and how we're going to create the next section of our life.
Yeah, I would say that, like, if you get your purpose right, if you're doing that purpose work, you can keep your purpose the same. You know, if your purpose is to leave it better than you found it, for example, you can do that as the business owner, but you can also do that in a different way without that operating company. But without that clarity of purpose, it is extremely disorienting. I want to do a couple rapid fire questions with you, but, you know, I think when the advisors read this paper, maybe some of this feels overwhelming, you know, all the things that I might have to learn and all the things that I might have to do. And there's this Charlie Munger quote that I love that reads, I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they are learning machines. They go to bed every night a little bit wiser than they were when they got up, and boy, does that help. And I think for any of the advisors, like, you don't have to do 40 things. The first thing you can do is just read this paper. And in this paper, you're going to find references to other things that you might want to go explore and read and get comfortable on. So don't make it bigger than it needs to be. Just try to go to bed a little bit smarter than you were when you woke up in the morning, and just keep doing that. And before you know it, you're going to be having conversations with these types of clients and feel very comfortable doing it. And there's lots of resources in the AB Advisor Institute. You referenced standard of care and things like that. And we'll put a link in the show notes for people that want to go explore some of Ken's and AB's work. But Ken, a couple rapid fire questions. If you could wave a magic wand and teach every advisor one truth about ultra high net worth clients, what would it be?
The challenge of narrow framing and the implication of that. I think of all the issues facing financial advisors today, understanding how the human brain limits its cognitive scope and avoids information in order to protect itself from being overwhelmed, that impacts the decision-making of clients And to the point you just made prior, it also impacts the decision-making of advisors. Advisors want to simplify the vision of working with clients. Clients want to simplify everything. And you know what? Sometimes it's just not that simple. You have to go to medical school to become a doctor, and then you have to go practice your skills to become a good doctor.
Right.
One of my kids is a physician, and it's not a short process to get there. It's meaningful, but it's not short and it's not easy. And I think that's what I would suggest at the highest level. Advisors realize that if you're going to work at the highest level in the industry, you have to bring the highest level of acquired skill to the enterprise.
Okay, what is the most surprising emotional struggle you've seen clients face after a liquidity event, maybe something that advisors overlook?
It is a sense of all of their identity stripped away, and it's so counterintuitive for the advisor who doesn't have that kind of wealth to understand that this wealth experience literally ended their life and catapulted them into this new experience where their friends can't keep up with them and their family may be annoyed with them. Many families are really struggle with a member of the family kind of jumping out of the same socioeconomic strata as the family. It's an abrupt and a disorganizing experience and very painful. I mean, what I think Total Family represents in that regard is a place for the client to go to create a new sense of identity and meaning and purpose of their life. That's life-saving for these folks, because the other option is, geez, the last time I felt good was when I was running a business. I think I'll go start another business.
Right.
Which is just not a good choice to make. Authoring the next stage of life is a challenge, but it's an important challenge to face head on and grapple with and move forward to. And these people need support in doing that.
Yeah, you're talking about, you referenced the work by DC and Ryan, and Daniel Pink kind of talks about it in a different way, but control, competence, and connection, or autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The purpose is certainly disrupted in that identity, but also that competence or mastery, all of a sudden it's like, I was good at this thing, and now I don't know what I'm good at. And
exactly.
And I think that anyone can, sometimes that can come from retirement too, I think, but certainly for these business owners, it's abrupt. And a business owner, I think, lives their business in a way that is different than maybe someone who's working a corporate job. Not to say that they're not committed to a corporation or anything like that, but just you live your business in a totally different way. Okay, one or two just big items for takeaways from our conversation today. If an advisor, financial advisor, was listening to just one or two things, what would you remind them to go back to?
What I remind them of is that the job to be done of the financial advisor is utterly correlated to the client they're working with and their point of need. The business design of the advisor's business must be a reflection of the needs of the clientele they're working with.
Yeah.
Just as an example of this, I have one clientele, one group of people I serve, client-facing retail financial advisors. I know a lot about their experience. I know a lot about their needs. I know a lot about their developmental process. I know a lot about the tools they have and the tools they do not have. As a result, I have a business model that allows me to continuously design, improve, and expand and evolve that business model to meet my clientele at their point of need.
Yep.
Too few advisors are designing their business with a clientele in mind, and then looking at their business model design and saying, okay, is this big enough, good enough, clear enough, superior enough for me to go out to business with this? They're more opportunist and, I want to work with everybody under the sun, and if I could get some high net worth clients in there, that would be great.
Sure.
That is a mistake. There's no business in the world that any investor would invest in that doesn't have clarity about where they're going. So I would say business design, the job to be done, is a reflection on the client. And the other thing I would suggest is, if you want two big takeaways, is the financial journey of the ultra high net worth client is an external experience that is observable. We know where this person is at in the sale of their business in the terms of the liquidity event. Are they pre-liquidity event? Are they pre-decision to sell? Are they mid-liquidity event? Are they post-liquidity event 6 months? Are they post-liquidity event 5 years? We know what that financial journey looks like. What we've done in the paper is we've mapped the emotional journey to it. So we know where cognitive bandwidth starts to decline. We know where they're in the depth of the change process. We know where they begin to adapt and what it looks like. We have indicators. And in the paper, I go through that. When the person is starting to emerge on the other side, what does it start to look like? What are the evidences they're adapting? And you see their cognitive bandwidth expanding. And by the way, that's when they'll replace their advisor.
That's right.
They start to learn about what they need, or they're exposed to somebody who can do the visioning and can do the purpose decision and the mission definition, and they realize, oh my goodness, that's what I need.
Right. No, that's totally right. I mean, the old relationships, new relationships coming in, that's a huge point of risk for the advisor.
Absolutely.
Right? Because all of a sudden we have investment bankers, lawyers that, hey, do you have a financial, are they really equipped to support you at your new level? Right? These are the questions, and let me make an introduction, and let me do, these are huge points of risk for the advisor. But I think, if you are empathetic and authentic and you take the time to learn about your clients in a really deep way and understand what they're going to go through and help them through that journey, like the guide we talked about, it won't be a risk. They're going to say, I don't need to be introduced to anyone. I work with Ken. He's been with me. He's helped me navigate this entire journey, and he's going to help me get home, kind of thing.
Well, Alex, every one of the firms that I work with, and I work with all of the major firms and many of the second level firms, all have catalogs of stories of advisors who have had a client for years. And sometimes it's a wealth event, sometimes it's just retirement. And these stories are the same story, just different names.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for all the good work you've done with us over the last 30 years. I just turned 60. I've met an advisor who specializes in helping people transition into retirement and creating a cash flow plan for my retirement. So thanks for helping me grow the money. But now I'm going to work with this new advisor who fits me what I need at this point. And of course, John's advisor is like, well, I do that too.
Yeah.
And of course, the model, the business design never evolved and never met this client at a later stage. It was, it was set it and forget it. The idea here is, and I know a national organization whose entire business model is, we don't want to work with the mass affluent, but Mr. CPA or Mr. Accountant or Mr. Attorney, if your client is about to graduate from mass affluent into high net worth, we're the ones you want to work with. We think about us because we specialize in that experience.
Yeah.
That's how this journey begins to make sense, or for the advisor really becomes a map to understand there are points in time where the client is going to be very accessible to the messaging of other advisors. And you want to be aware of that, and you want to build your business so your business is unassailable to that kind of messaging.
Yeah, and we didn't touch on this, but like this emotional journey, a lot of times there's someone riding the sidecar too, right? Their spouse is there with them. And this is also an opportunity to help the spouse understand what their person is going to be experiencing, how it's going to affect the family and all the people in the family. And so, I think a lot of the work that we're constantly doing is like, don't forget about that other person, because many times, the business owner is the CFO of the house, but the other person that's in the house is really the CEO, making a lot of decisions about the future of the family and those types of things. So didn't want to forget to mention the spouse there. Ken, if advisors want to learn about your work, Access Advisor Institute, We'll put whatever you say in the show notes, but where do they go? What do they look up?
Well, we have a podcast series that's available. All you have to do is go on to any of the podcast libraries and put in my name, Ken Haman, Secrets of Successful Advisors will come up. That's a great place to get started with some of the podcasts. There's a whole variety of topics. But AllianceBernstein, the Advisor Institute at AllianceBernstein, if you just go to the AllianceBernstein homepage, the Advisor Institute is there. We can give you access once you make contact with us. We'll give you access to our library. We have a wonderful utility called the Digital Coach that allow you to search through all of our library. Currently have over 65 solutions. This white paper on the ultra high net worth client is just one of them. Happy to be helpful. And, my email is certainly available. It's my name at AllianceBernstein.com. If you want to make contact, I'll put you in touch with the right people to get the information you're looking for.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you for all the work that AB is doing at the ultra high net worth level, all the work you're doing for financial advisors, and thank you for coming on Visionary Advisor. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Alex.
That is all we have for you today, Visionary Advisors. Until next time, remember the future of wealth starts with you.